Hey, Arcturus here. Today, we're looking at a battle force for the Ossiarch Bonereapers, the Praetorian Spearhead. These miniatures are for use in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. This box comes with 31 miniatures, including 4 Morghast Archai or Harbingers, as that kit can build either of those options. It also comes with a Gothazar Harvester, 5 Cavalos Death Riders, 20 Mortek Guard, and the Arch-Cavalos, which can also be built as a named variant. Take a quick look here at the back of the box where we get some more details on these miniatures. So just some more close-up details for each of these. We have our Mortek Guard up here on the top. Now they do also have an option for swords or the spears as shown here. Generally in Age of Sigmar, you can't mix and match in the same squad, but you can mix and match between different squads. So you could have a squad of spears and a squad of swords. I think in the current edition, which is 3rd at the time of filming this, they're all listed as Nandrite weapons now, but I could be wrong on that. So if you do have the information, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. We also have the Cavalos Death Riders, which have an option for a banner. I believe these only come with spears, but we'll find out in a moment when we look at the sprue. We also have the Arch-Cavalos, which can be also built as Arch-Cavalos Xantos, which is the named variant, who has the spear, and then the standard or generic Arch-Cavalos just has the sword, like here. Though if you built the one with the spear, I personally think that one looks cooler, and you ran it as a standard Arch-Cavalos, most people will not have a problem with that. You might run into a problem with tournaments, but I don't tend to play in tournaments, so that's not as much of a concern for me. But if you do, that is something to keep in mind. Generally, you want to go build the model as it's shown on the board for tournaments. Here we have the Harbingers and Archai. Archai here have the spears, while the Harbingers have the dual blades. It's a slight difference between attack values, or number of attacks and rend. And then we have the Gothazar Harvester. It does have these either spiked clubs or these Khopesh looking knife arms. I believe in 3rd edition there's not a difference between weapons. When the Bonereapers came out there was, but I don't believe that is still the case. You'll notice this box has kind of come apart here. That's how I got it from shipping. I did open it to make sure everything was intact, and it was, but we'll look at it a bit closer. But the glue seam here just failed in shipping, I guess. So here we have our instruction booklets for each of these. This is pretty common for their battle forces. You wind up, instead of like one of their box sets where you get a more unique instruction manual, this one just comes with the various instructions that you would get if you bought all the kits individually. So for instance, here we have the options with swords, but you can also build them with spears. And generally you just build the torsos and then you choose your weapons. They do have a banner, of course. Yeah, they also have a special weapon option for a greatsword, which had more rend, I believe. Originally, I'm not entirely sure, but looking here on the back, it has the same number of attacks, but does more damage. More damage in this edition. Whereas if we look at the difference between the sword and the shield, the sword will hit on a 3, wound on a 4, but only has a 1-inch range, whereas the spear has a 2-inch range, but hits and wounds on 4-ups. And both of those, all weapons now do 1 rend, and except for the greatsword, the sword and spears each do 1 damage, which, playing the game itself, it does help streamline some of that process. Looking here at the Harvester, you have a small amount of variation, basically how the head lines up. And then you just have all the various parts here. And then, of course, you have the difference in weapon arms, either the clubs or the blades. And that's pretty much it for these guys. I think it looks cooler with the blades, personally. But you can build it either way you want. So on this, it does have a ranged attack, 16 inches, 4 attacks, hitting and wounding on 3s for 1 rend and 1 damage. And then it has either the club or sword, sword having slightly longer No, they have the club and sword actually have the same profile, so it's entirely a matter of preference. And that's 6 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, for 2 rend and 2 damage. And then I guess we have the legs and tail with a 2-inch range, 4 attacks, hitting and wounding on 3s as well, -1 rend and for 2 damage. So here we have the Kavalos Death Riders. You have a Lord with 2 different types of spear to kind of help you differentiate if you have multiple squads of these. And then you have your Standard Bearer, who can also wield a spear in case you don't want to make multiple Standard Bearers if you have multiples of these kits. And you can also give these guys swords for the as an alternative build for them as well. Generally, they're built with spears. I think that's more fitting for this type of cavalry. They look more like lancers to me, but you are, of course, free to build them however you want. There is a slight difference in terms of weapons, much like the Mortec Guard. The swords hit on a 3 instead of a 4, but the rend and damage is the same, and the spears have a 1-inch longer range. And then, of course, the hooves of the mount also do damage. And normally in the battle tome, there'll be a bit more details on any special abilities of the units. The information we're looking at here is just for the weapon, so it doesn't give us any extra abilities the unit might have. Looking at the Archi or the Harbingers, you can build them either way. The Archi have a slightly more armored look, but both can take the glaives or the dual blades. It's entirely up to you on which you prefer. When I built a set of these originally, the glaives were better, a little cooler in my opinion. Though I find these particular models a little difficult to transport because of their size. So if you aren't going to be playing solely at home, they are a little difficult to move around because they have all these spiky, they have these huge wings. They only attach at the base of the wings here, and they have all these spikes, so they're a little difficult to move around without breaking them. But they're cool models. They work great on the table. These would always die first, but they would always kill something important, and your opponent would have no choice but to deal with them. So that was always fun, because they just put out too much damage otherwise, so fun times. So here looking at there's not a huge difference on this sheet, but in the Battle Tome, each one has a different ability. So the Harbingers, I think, had a leadership debuff, and the Archi had a 4-up invuln save against mortal wounds. At least that was true in the previous edition. I'm not sure what it is in this current edition. But between the two weapons, the glaive has a longer range, only does 3 attacks, hitting and wounding on 3s, 2 rend, 3 damage, whereas the short blades have 5 attacks, also hitting and wounding on 3s, but for -1 rend and 2 damage each. So theoretically, the dual blades do more damage, right? Maxing out at 10 instead of 9. However, I find that extra point of rend on the glaives often means it does more damage, generally speaking, but of course it depends on how you roll to hit and wound, and that's true between both the Archi and the Harbingers. Last up is the Archkavalos, either the named version as Xantos or the non-named version. So here we have a more clear view. Xantos also gets a spirit on the ground here, which if you don't build him, you could save and use for a different model, of course. Let's see, here we have just the standard instructions. The only real difference between the two is Xantos has a spear and the Liege Kavalos has a sword. And that's pretty much it. If I remember correctly, the Xantos has some special abilities on top of what the Liege Kavalos gets. Don't know if that's still true in 3rd edition as well. See, so we also have the hooves and mount attacks. 6 attacks for the mount, hitting and wounding on 3s, 1 rend, 1 damage. And then for his spear, with 5 attacks, hitting and wounding on 3s, 2 rend, and 2 damage. And that's for Archkavalos Xantos. For the Liege Kavalos, he has a little bit shorter range with his blade, but has the same number of attacks at 1 rend and 2 damage, and the mount does the same number of attacks for either option. So you do also lose that extra point of rend for the sword compared to the lance, as well as that range, but that's pretty much the only difference. Normally the named characters cost a bit more in points, so that might be a reason to not take a named character over the more generic liege if you're trying to put those points to use somewhere else. But let's take a quick look at the sprue. So here, multiple horses, the banner, some shields. I do prefer the Cavalos Death Riders with spears, as I think it looks better. So one smaller sprue, and then of course we have this larger one. So here we'll start with the top, and then I'll rotate it to show the back. So these are very cool models. I actually have another set of these sitting in storage that I have not yet assembled, which is kind of silly, but I have not actually been able to sit down and play Age of Sigmar in quite some time. Here we have the ArcturusHobbies with his larger horse and some base detail there with that pillar, as well as then the spirit here and the other half of the spirit, I think. I do like their spirits. They do look really cool, although they're a little fiddly and generally seem prone to breaking, at least to me. Though I do have to transport mine a fair ways to get to play. And then here's the rest of the sprue for that ArcturusHobbies with the spear, sword options, shield, all that extra good stuff. Put that out of the way. Next up, we have the Gothazar Harvester. So here we've got the main portion of the body and tail, as well as some of the smaller armed pieces of this strange construct. And then there we have the other side, as well as here the remainder of it. Here we have one set of the sprue for the Morghasts. Both large weapon options. You do have to assemble the glaives. The dual blade options just attach at the wrist, but the glaives do need to be assembled using these staves here, and then you have some variations for the heads. So depending on how you want to put those together, you do have some options. And then here we have the wings. You can see these are quite spindly here on the ends with some tattered remnants of either flesh, or you can also paint them up like the spirit options, as you have all these spirits coming off their wings here. I'm quite fond of that idea, though I have not painted the one set of these. I've already got assembled. I'm quite a slow painter, unfortunately, so there's some more of those details there. They do have one more sprue that comes with them for that second set of wings. Oops, let's slide that out of the way there. They do have one more sprue, being this one, where you get some of the armor pieces for the chest. You have a much more heavily armored and then more of like a bone armor style, and I believe you have another set of those. Yes, we have another set of those here as well. So you can make them with the same style of armor. I prefer the more heavily armored version myself. And then here we have one set of the sprue for the Mortek Guard. So I'm only going to show one set of the sprue for the Morghasts and the Mortek Guard, because the other set of the sprue is the exact same. So you'll get 4 sets of these. I'm sorry, 2 sets of these 2 sprue. So 4 sets, 4 rectangular sprue in total. 2 with banners, 2 without banners to make your 20 Mortek Guard. Normally on the field, you can take them in units of 10. And then for the Morghasts, you'll wind up with an identical extra set of sprue, because you can make 4 sets of Morghasts, but there's no reason to show those extra sprue there. So this was the Christmas Battleforce box set. I'm not sure if it is still available. I suspect by the time this video goes up, it will not be. However, if you do find it, when it was listed, it was quite good value at, I believe, $230. Might have been $220. However, I was able to pick this up for $190, so that does improve the savings. Base savings on this box, sorry, the total Total value of the items in this box was close to $380. When you go through and tally up the cost of 4 Morghasts, a box of 20, which are about $70 each. They are out of stock online currently as of filming. Box of Mortec Guard, the Cavalos, Death Riders, the Liege Cavalos, and the Gothazar Harvester. And that tallied up to about $380. So that's quite good savings, especially for Games Workshop, as some of their stuff can be a little bit more expensive. So if you're looking to buy the official items, the battle forces are a nice way to save. They tend to do them every year right around Thanksgiving. This year, this was the only one that I was quite interested in, as I don't really play any of the other armies, although some of them did look excellent. A friend of mine picked up the Soulblight Gravelords box, for instance, and was quite pleased with that. They'd also do them for Warhammer 40k. This year, the only one for 40k that caught my eye was the Beast Orcs box. And since there is very little chance I ever get around to building those, let alone playing with them, I decided not to pick that up, as I didn't want to spend the extra money, as I had bought some Lego. However, I hope you enjoyed this look. All these models are still available through Games Workshop, just not quite in this discounted bundle. But they are available individually, so if you are interested in the Bonereapers, please do check that out. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I will see you next time.